Fourth, the resacralizing of nature, a Gaia ethic. Chief Seattle said, "What is a man without the beast? If all the beasts were gone, men would die from a great loneliness of spirit. For whatever happens to the beast soon happens to the man. All things are connected." How often do you hear that? All things are connected. 3 weeks ago, my wife and I went up to Yosemite and for the weekend, and on the way in, we did a snowshoe hike. A couple of pictures that were up there earlier from that. We used to do that all the time in Colorado and can't do it that often here in California. But it was great. Then we went down, stayed in the valley, and we always go to the visitor center and watch the latest videos or movies they have and see what they have. Then we get out of there. But here was this video. It's called "The Spirit of Yosemite." And it starts out with all these beautiful pictures of waterfalls and flowing brooks and snow falling and the magnificent cliffs of El Cap and Half Dome. And the narrator says something about everyone who visits Yosemite Valley senses something special. They sense the presence of a spirit, the spirit of Yosemite. And then he goes on and develops it. And he talks about the spirit of Yosemite, how interconnected everything is. And over there was this notion of we're all one, we're all connected. And Barbie looked at me and she just shook her head, and what do you expect? And then of course they talk about the Awanichi Indians and how they recognized how everything was one. And we thought, do you think anybody could write a script to be shown in a film in the Visitor Center of Yosemite that said, many, many people who visit Yosemite Valley see the grandeur of the creation and they praise God Almighty? Could you get away with that? Of course not. You got to talk about how the Awanichi Indians saw that everything was one, and how this kind of thing. And this notion that everything's, how often do you hear that? If you visit the national parks, you hear it all the time. If you read environmental literature, you see it all the time. We're all one. We're all connected. This is a fundamental idea of the Gaia ethic. James Lovelock was the one who came up with this, a British naturalist, philosopher, futurist. Published this book, Gaia, A New Look at Life on Earth. When did he publish that? I don't have the date here. I deleted all my footnotes from my notes. It's early 70s, somewhere in there. Now, think the historical context. Many of us can remember the 60s. If you're old enough to remember them and you can't, you lived them. But I was at the Air Force Academy in the 60s, just skipped right over us and dropped in Boulder. But the 60s as an event lasted into the mid-70s, I think. And it was this time of major paradigm shifts in thought. This new way of thinking was actually very old. It was the incorporation into the Western counterculture of Eastern religious thought. Concepts in Eastern religions were applied to things as diverse as motorcycle maintenance and quantum mechanics. Remember Gary Zukav's book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Or Fritjof Capra's book about quantum mechanics, the dancing Wu Li masters. Converts to this Eastern philosophical or religious point of view, for the most part, were not converts to Eastern religion. Rather, they found in Eastern religion certain themes which proved useful in challenging the rooted paradigms of the 50s of our parents, if you will. Eco-historian, self-described eco-historian Carolyn Merchant writes this: in the 1960s, the Native American became the symbol in the ecological movement's search for alternatives to Western exploitative attitudes. The Indian animistic belief system and reverence for the earth as a mother were contrasted with the Judeo-Christian heritage of domination over nature and with capitalist practices resulting in the tragedy of the commons. I'll say more about this notion of the tragedy of the commons on Saturday. Just basically the idea is if something is common, people don't take care of it. Every day I walk the short distance from the parking lot in front of Myers over there into my office at Myers. Virtually every day I'll stop and pick up a candy wrapper, a napkin, some piece of trash. It's passed by hundreds of people, but it's common. No one has a responsibility for doing it until the people we pay at Biola get around to do it. Or one thing that really bugs me, you can edit this out, but this really bugs me. I go in the bathroom, the men's room, after lunch, and we got these machines. I think we have them in this building too. You move your hand over it, and automatically you get. So people doing, take about 2 or 3 sheets, wipe their hands, and toss them in the trash can. And the trash can fills up and begins to spill over, and nobody does anything about it. They toss the paper towel, and it falls out, and they walk out. And so I'll go in there and pick up all the paper towels, put them in, pull my foot up and stomp it down. And the students kind of look at me like, there's that weird prof. I'll bet he recycles too. But it's the tragedy of the commons. I think I don't want to walk into a messy men's room. I don't want a visitor to Talbot School of Theology or Biola University to come in and see trash. But it's common, no one has responsibility. So Merchant says the tragedy of the commons comes out of the capitalist mentality that if everybody owns it, nobody cares for it. In contrast to that, she says is the Eastern or the Native American view that it's all sacred. In the 80s, the same stew was blended together with feminist themes and Wiccan themes, and we called it the New Age. That's still around. Nobody much talks about it as the New Age. We don't use those words so much anymore, but it surely is here with us. But it was the work of Lovelock that gained widespread attention and made environmentalism a vital part of the New Age, and gave the basis for this resacralizing ethic, or deifying Mother Earth. Lovelock's book, Gaia, A New Look at Life on Earth, described the Gaia hypothesis. Oh, he's also written a later one. This one is a year or two old. The Revenge of Gaia, Earth's Climate Crisis and the Fate of Humanity. She's going to get her revenge. Remember that old commercial, "It's not nice to fool Mother Nature"? Some of you remember that. That's what Lovelock says here. The Earth's living matter, the air, the oceans, and the land surface form a complex system which can be seen as a single organism and which has the capacity to keep our planet a fit place for life. This is the paradigm shift Lovelock brought to it. He brought a background in systems engineering, and he saw, when he looked at an ecosystem, he didn't look at it with the perspective of a naturalist. He didn't see the ponderosa pines and the aspens and the willows and the grasses and the beaver ponds. What he saw were carbon sinks and carbon sources, things like that. He saw energy transfer, cybernetic systems. But he said this is not just ecosystems, it's the entire Earth. The lithosphere, the biosphere, the atmosphere, all together is one single system, which he called Gaia. He says, what hazards and near disasters would have faced the infant biosphere, and how might Gaia's presence have helped to surmount them? It sounds now like Gaia is a semi-conscious thing. And he's talking about in the history of the world, when there was a high level of volcanism and what that did, and the tectonic plate movements, and how ultimately we have a biosphere like we have today that's suitable for life. He says, ingenuity triumphed and the danger was overcome, not in the human way, but in the flexible Gaian way, by adapting to change and converting a murderous intruder into a powerful friend, So you see Gaia is active and powerful and turning all things for good. If Gaia exists, then she, now by the end of the book, Gaia has not it, it's she. It's personified. She is without doubt intelligent in a limited sense, at least. You see where he's gone with this? He's gone from a purely mechanistic system of energy transfer, carbon sources and sinks, to a female entity that's a single organism and is somewhat intelligent. Now you wonder, is this just metaphor? Yeah.
I'm assuming, or I'm wondering, is he getting this thing in, is he relating it to a she because of the Greek goddess Gaia?
He chose the name Gaia because of the Greek goddess, exactly. Exactly. And that's, he moves in his book, I think, deliberately from it to she, because he wants it to have a certain personality. He wants to personify it as a female entity. He doesn't quite deify it, but his followers quickly did.
Is this very similar to the whole Mother Earth?
Yeah, exactly. That's what it becomes.
Yeah.
That's what it becomes. I'll spare you more quotes. Well, maybe not. Let me read you another one here from Lovelock. The concept of Mother Earth, or as the Greeks called her long ago, Gaia, has been widely held throughout history and has been the basis of a belief which still coexists with the great religions. Ancient belief and modern knowledge have fused emotionally in the awe with which astronauts with their own eyes and we by indirect vision have seen the Earth revealed in all its shining beauty against the deep darkness of space. Some of us are old enough to remember when Apollo 8 went to the moon. And that first picture they sent back that now is a classic poster from NASA, the blue marble picture. I actually had tears in my eyes when I saw that on television the first time. Some of you old enough to remember that? Were you awestruck at that? And Frank Borman and James Lovell, and I can't remember the third crewman there, were just awestruck. And that's what was one of, in another book, Lovelock says seeing that was one of the motives for developing his theory. Yet this feeling, however strong, does not prove that Mother Earth lives. Like a religious belief, it is scientifically untestable and therefore incapable in its own context of further rationalization. So what he's going to ask for is, he's going to give a very powerful description of Gaia, and then say, but I haven't proved there is this single thing called Gaia, but you have to believe it, like a religious conversion. That led to things like the Lindisfarne Association. And this is from their website. Lindisfarne is an association of individuals and groups around the world devoted to the study and realization of a new planetary culture. Seeking for the sacred in all forms of human activity and culture, members of the association share the following goals. The spiritual transformation of individual consciousness. We've all got to become spiritual, like Oprah, I guess, or Deepak Chopra or something like that. The realization of the inner harmony of the great universal religions are all the same, just different roads to the same thing. The resacralization, this is where I got the name for this, well, not just me, others, they call this the resacralization ethic. The resacralization of the relations between nature and culture through the development of an appropriate technology for a meta-industrial culture and the illumination of the spiritual dimension of the world order. Okay, this is their website. Now, they disbanded in 2009 as an official organization, but their fellows still meet once a year, and if you want to look for them on the web, you'd be surprised at some of the people that are members, that are fellows of this organization. Sort of the idea of searching for a higher consciousness so that we can recognize our unity with Mother Earth, with Gaia. And it gets weirder. You find posters like this. Maybe you don't go in those kinds of stores. This is a website. Gaia is named after the Greek earth goddess. And down at the bottom, Gaia is so great that she can recover from any disaster of given time. She can, you see. She is great. She can't be endangered by the unhealthy ways that humans treat her, but humans can be endangered by the way she reacts. So it's not nice to fool Mother Nature. And then you find things like this. Beautiful Earth Mother is perfect for your altar or your home. And take a trip to Sedona, Arizona, and you can find this stuff. The strange thing here, what Lovelock did in the context of the New Age movement and the cultural transformations of the 60s and 70s was provide environmentalists and feminists and Wiccans and American Buddhists who are nothing like real Buddhists and so on. He provided them with this image, and he's very coy whether or not he really believes Gaia is a real thing or not, or it's just a model. He's very coy about that. But he's provided them with this image, and especially by calling it she, is something that ecofeminists, I mean, there really is a strand of writing called ecofeminism that they can latch onto. Mother Earth, Goddess Mother Earth. Now, I think that the reason that an awful lot of Christians have a knee-jerk reaction against any kind of environmental ethic is either the extremes of the biocentric ethic, that there ought to be a great dieback of the human species, or this kind of resacralization. What? You're interested in environmental ethics? You mean Mother Earth? You want to worship the goddess? Yeah. Well, of course not. But there is that knee-jerk reaction. Theologically, I don't have anything that I need to say to you, do I? About how anti-Christian this is. Questions, comments about this so far? Now, you may think that I've been cherry picking, looking for nice, easy to criticize approaches to environmental ethics. I really haven't. These are the 4 major approaches. And an anthology like this will have articles from all 4. It'll have the Gaian approach, where nature is sacred, or the biocentric approach, where all life is valuable, or an ecocentric approach like Ralston takes, or a pure pragmatic approach, there's no value in nature except its value to us. And those are really the 4 that are out there. All 4 are seriously flawed. They leave us with these questions. How many of you have heard of this Gaia hypothesis before? Is this a new idea? You have heard of it, or no? Believe me, it's pretty common. It may not be common here, but go to Santa Cruz or Berkeley or Boulder or Amherst or Cambridge, Mass, and you'll find it.
What do they say about the rest of the universe? Is that ignored, and this is just like
yeah, it's probably ignored.
Cell in space?
Yeah, largely ignored. It's ignored. I mean, we're all stuff of stardust. They'll say things like that, but Gaia doesn't have much to do with the exoplanet search or anything like that. Okay. Remaining questions. Do individual living organisms or species or ecosystems have moral rights? I alluded to this at the beginning. Now, Taylor would say in the biocentric ethic, yes, they do, simply because they're alive. But he failed to give us a grounding for that. The 4th point, if you look back in your notes, of his 4 points of a biocentric ethic, we should just accept as a cardinal principle that humans we're no different value, and if we're no different value than anything else that's alive, then everything else has the same value. If we have moral value, then they do too. If they have rights, we have duties to them. But how do we exercise those duties? We have to eat. We have to breathe. It always amuses me to see people that want to be carbon neutral. One of our faculty members, a chemist at Biola, has his degrees from MIT, and he has a friend, classmate from MIT, who is in San Francisco and is striving for a carbon neutral lifestyle. And it's incredibly difficult for this guy to reduce his travel, and he's ultimately has to buy all kinds of carbon offsets. He has to pay for carbon offsets because he can't live a carbon neutral. In fact, if you die, you're not carbon neutral. I mean, you're still going to decay. You better decay anaerobically, otherwise you're going to put greenhouse gas. So what is our duty? Where do we draw the line? None of these have yet given us action guiding principles. The biocentric ethic says it's our duty to treat every living thing the same as we treat ourselves. It's a deontological ethic. But what exactly are those duties? What does it mean to treat every living thing the same? The ecocentric ethic of Ralston is more of a consequentialist ethic, and perhaps it could also be considered a virtue ethic, because we ought to value what's valuable. A virtuous person values what is valuable. But the problem that one of you mentioned was, how do we decide the degrees of value? Just because someone else values it, do I need to value it? And do I need to value it to the same degree? And certainly the resacralization ethic doesn't help us at all here. In fact, Lovelock says, contrary to an awful lot of people that also push a Gaia ethic, Lovelock says there is no ethic. He says Gaia is Gaia. Gaia will do what she ought to do to preserve herself. Whatever we do doesn't matter. Gaia will preserve herself. But others try to draw some kind of a moral from the fact that we owe a duty to this goddess. And of course, the vast majority of people are going to have great difficulty with that kind of a view. So I don't think we yet have any question or any answers to how we ground these kinds of rights and duties. And so far, we haven't been able to ground rights and duties either with respect to future generations. I would sure like my grandchildren to be able to visit Yosemite and see it the way I see it. Last summer, my wife and I visited the north rim of the Grand Canyon. We hadn't been there since our honeymoon. And as you may know, there's some concern in the Grand Canyon, both with noise pollution, all the tourist helicopters flying over, and they've tried to restrict the airspace some so that you get quiet by the Grand Canyon. But there's also a couple of large power plants several hundred miles away that cause air pollution if the winds are right. And when we were there, we had a good day. You could see from the north rim clear across to the south rim. But there are days where you can't see from the north to the south or vice versa. And I would sure like my grandkids to be able to see the splendor of the Grand Canyon. But do I have a duty to my grandchildren or their children, a duty that would entail trying to limit the emissions of those power plants? They don't exist. How could they have rights? How could they have a claim against me? How can we give them their due? None of these systems give us solid answers to this. In anticipation, here's where I'm going to go tomorrow. God, as creator, is owner. God owns the universe. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the psalmist said. So as owner, what is valuable to him ought to be valuable to me. Then we can see in Genesis 1, in the blessing to humanity, to have dominion, subdue, and rule. We can see there God conferring on humanity a royal duty to subdue and rule and have dominion, and we'll unpack those words. And in Genesis 2, when God put Adam in the garden, he told him to guard it and to work it. And those words are priestly words. So there's a royal duty and a priestly duty conferred on humanity with respect to creation. But ultimately, then we bring in the concept of stewardship. The steward works for the master. The steward values what the master values, and the steward manages the estate as the master would if he were present. So I may not have a duty to future generations, but I have a duty to God with respect to future generations. I may not have a duty to an endangered species, but I may have a duty to God with respect to endangered species. So both values and duties can be grounded theocentrically in a way that none of these four common approaches can. To me, that's exciting. Because when I want to, for myself, I wanted to find some kind of an environmental ethic whereby I could say to people, you ought to recycle. You ought to take care of the nature around you. You ought to worry about the natural world. But naturalistically, I couldn't come up with an ethic that would do that. Theistically, I can. With no pictures of drowning polar bears or belching smokestacks. Okay, so that's where we're going to go.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.